The acid in her tears. The wind howled outside the ruins of the old alien facility. Jorn pulled his coat tighter around him. Dust blew across the cracked ground. His boots crunched on broken glass and metal scraps as he stepped through the entrance. He wasn't supposed to be here. Planet Sector 9 had been marked dangerous and abandoned. But scavengers like Jorn didn't listen to warnings. They listened to whispers about hidden tech, lost weapons, and forgotten riches. And today, he was following one of those whispers. The inside of the facility was dark and cold. Metal walls were covered in rust and strange slime. Strange writing, not in any human language, was scrawled across doors and screens. Jorn stepped carefully, flashlight in hand, scanning each room. Most chambers were empty. Some had destroyed machines, others had bones. Alien bones, burnt and broken. Whatever happened here long ago, it wasn't peaceful. Then he found it. A thick metal door stood at the end of a narrow hall. It was sealed shut, but a control panel next to it was still glowing faintly. Jorn wiped the dust and tapped the screen. The symbols made no sense, but one button was red and blinking. He pressed it. The door opened with a loud hiss. Inside was a single pod, shaped like a coffin, glowing with dim blue light. Fog rolled out as the lid slowly rose. Jorn stepped closer and froze. Inside was a girl. Alien, yet beautiful in a strange way. Her skin was pale silver with tiny scales that shimmered. Her arms and legs were chained, her mouth gagged with a glowing metal strip. Her eyes opened slowly, glowing purple, full of pain and fear. Jorn's heart pounded. She looked weak, but alive. He leaned closer. "Hey, can you hear me?" She blinked. Then, drip. A tear rolled from her eye and landed on the edge of the metal pod. Shishes. The metal hissed and sizzled, smoke rising as a hole began to burn through the edge. Jorn jumped back in shock, his eyes wide. "What the hell?" The girl whimpered, shaking her head, trying to speak behind the metal gag. He looked at her, then the chains, then back at her, terror burning the pod. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was something dangerous. Still, she looked scared, not like a monster, like someone who had been locked away for a long time. Jorn made a choice. He pulled out his plasma cutter and began slicing through the chains. One by one, they dropped. Her wrists were bruised. Her legs trembled. She didn't move until he reached for the gag. "Easy," he whispered, slowly unlocking it. The metal dropped from her mouth. She gasped, coughing, her breath sharp and shaky. "And not human," she whispered. "I am human," Jorn said carefully. She looked at him like he was the answer to a question she'd waited a lifetime for. Then she reached out and touched his hand. Jorn flinched, but nothing happened. Her fingers were cold, soft, and harmless. "It didn't burn you," she said in shock. You're immune." Before he could ask what she meant, alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed across the room. Metal doors slammed shut in the hallway. A robotic voice in alien tongue echoed loudly. "Oh," Jorn muttered. "They know we're here." The alien girl stood up, weak but angry now. Her body shook. Another drop of liquid fell from her lip, this time onto the floor. The metal tiles bubbled and melted instantly. Jorn stepped back again. Okay. I see why they locked you up." She looked down, ashamed. "Wait," he said. "What's your name?" She looked up at him. Slowly, she raised her finger and wrote something on the glass wall with her finger. The glass didn't melt. "Velit. That's your name?" Jorn asked. She nodded. "I'm Jorn," he said. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Not human, not friendly. "Can you fight?" he asked quickly. She looked down. "Only if I have to." A security droid charged into the room, metal arms raised, electric blades glowing. Vilith stepped forward. Her mouth opened, and she spat. A sizzling spray of thick liquid hit the droid's chest. The robot screamed in a mechanical voice and began to melt, collapsing into a puddle of smoking metal. Velith panted, falling to her knees. "I don't want to be a weapon." Jorn rushed to her side. "You're not," he said. "You're a person. I'm getting you out of here." Another alarm. More droids coming. Jorn helped her up. "Can you run?" "I can try." Together, they ran into the hallway, disappearing into the shadows of the dead facility. Behind them, her last tear still hissed on the metal. Why she was created. The halls of the alien facility were cold, dark, and filled with the scent of rust and burnt metal. Jorn held Velith's hand tightly as they ran. Her steps were weak, but she refused to stop. The alarms were louder now, echoing through the walls like a warning from a sleeping beast. They turned a corner and slipped into an old control room. Jorn slammed the door behind them, locking it manually with a bent metal rod. Both of them were breathing hard. Velith leaned against the wall, her silver skin shining in the red emergency lights. Jorn looked at her, her body shaking, her eyes wide with fear. She was powerful, yet so broken inside. "Are you okay?" Jorn asked, kneeling in front of her. She gave a small nod. "I haven't walked in years." He noticed the marks on her arms, scars where the chains had bitten into her skin. She didn't just look like a prisoner. She looked like someone they tried to erase. "Why did they keep you locked away?" Jorn asked gently. "Who did this to you?" Velith didn't speak right away. Instead, she pointed to the wall where broken computer screens hung. "The answers are in there." Jorn walked over to the console. Most screens were cracked or completely black, but one still glowed faintly. It was written in alien script. "Can you read this?" he asked. Velith nodded and moved beside him. Her fingers danced across the screen. The symbols shifted. She opened a hidden file named Project 9 Sylvae. A video file played. On the screen, Jorn saw a much younger Velith, maybe just a teenager. She was sitting inside a bright white lab. Alien scientists surrounded her, poking, cutting, testing. One wore a metal suit to protect himself from her saliva. Others observed her like she was an object. "This is Subject Velith," said a deep alien voice from the video. "Species hybrid, engineered using the corrosive glands of the Raza beast and humanoid DNA for intelligence. A living weapon. Spit melts metal. Skin adapts. Target, battlefield control, and enemy neutralization." Jorn stared at the screen, horrified. Another video played. Velith screamed as scientists poured liquid into her mouth. She coughed, and a blast of acid burned through the table. One scientist clapped like it was a victory. She cried. No one cared. "They made you to be a weapon," Jorn said softly. Velith looked down. "I didn't want to hurt anyone, but they made me. Over and over. Until I stopped feeling." Jorn sat beside her. "But you still feel, don't you?" Her voice cracked. "Yes. When I saw you, I felt again." Suddenly, a loud boom shook the room. "They're breaking through the doors," Jorn said. "We need a way out." Velith stood up and pointed to the side. "There's a ventilation shaft. I remember." They crawled into the tight, dark space. Jorn led the way, flashlight in one hand, the other guiding Velith. Behind them, distant shouts and clanking metal grew louder. As they crawled, Jorn spoke softly. "Why didn't your spit hurt me?" Velith paused. "You're human." "So?" She hesitated. "They tested on many species. My saliva melts all. Except one." Jorn looked back at her. "Humans." She nodded slowly. "Only humans are immune. No one knows why." "That's weird," Jorn said, "but kind of lucky for me. I think," she said slowly, "I was made to kill everyone but humans. Or maybe, I was made for humans." The words hung heavy between them. After a few minutes, they dropped into another room. This one looked like a forgotten lab. Thick dust covered everything. Tables were flipped, and glass jars with strange things inside lined the shelves. Velith sat down, clearly exhausted. Her fingers touched her lips. My body changes with emotion. Fear makes it stronger. Anger too. But when I feel calm, I can control it. You were trained to be a monster, Jorn said. But that's not who you are. Velith looked at him with shining eyes. How can you say that? You just met me. Because you saved me from that droid. You didn't have to. She gave a tiny smile. You freed me. I owed you. No, Jorn said. You're free now. You don't owe anyone. Suddenly, a sound came from the vent above. Jorn raised his weapon. A drone dropped in. Velith pushed him aside and hissed. Her saliva sprayed upward, hitting the drone. It melted in seconds, sizzling as it dropped to the floor in a puddle of goo. She wiped her mouth and whispered, I hate this. Jorn helped her up again. We're going to get out of here. I swear. As they opened a hidden door and stepped into a long dark tunnel, Jorn whispered, You're not a weapon anymore, Velith. You're someone worth saving. Velith looked at him. No one had ever said that to her before. Her body is a bioweapon. The underground tunnel stretched into darkness. Jorn and Velith walked slowly, side by side. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were cracked with age. Faint blue lights blinked in the ceiling. Some dying, some already dead. Velith walked with her head down. Her body was sore, her mind even more tired. For years, she had been nothing but a test subject. A tool. A danger. Now she was free. But freedom felt like a heavy chain too. Jorn looked at her as they walked. Her silver skin seemed to glow in the dim tunnel. Her breath was slow and shaky, and she kept glancing at her hands like she was afraid of them. You okay? Jorn asked gently. I'm trying, Velith whispered. I feel like I'm going to break. You already did the impossible, Jorn said. You escaped that place. She gave a sad smile. But what if I bring death wherever I go? They reached an old maintenance room and stopped to rest. There was a broken mirror on the wall. Velith stared at her reflection. I don't even look like myself anymore, she said. I remember my face before they changed it. It was soft. Normal. I had freckles. Jorn sat down beside her. You still look like someone worth saving. She turned her face to him. Do you really believe that? I saw how you shook when you melted that drone. You hate hurting others. That tells me everything. Velith blinked slowly. A tear rolled down, but this one didn't burn. It was just a tear. I want to learn. To be normal, she whispered. Can you teach me? Jorn nodded. We'll start now. He stood up and walked to a small shelf. There were rusted metal pipes and old tools. He picked up a piece of scrap metal and held it out. Breathe on this, he said. Velith hesitated. It'll melt. Control it, Jorn said calmly. Don't think of pain. Think of calm. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and exhaled slowly. Nothing happened. She opened her eyes in shock. Jorn smiled. See, you can control it. Velith's lips trembled. I've never done that before. Good, Jorn said. Now again. They practiced for hours. Velith learned to spit small amounts of acid without letting it splash. She learned to breathe near glass without fogging or burning it. She even learned to touch her own arms without fear. You're not just a weapon, Jorn said. You're becoming someone powerful. By choice. Just then, Jorn's communicator beeped. He frowned and pulled it out. A message played on the cracked screen. Warning. Subject Velith has escaped containment. Human male identified. Jorn Vassal. Reward. 800,000 credits for capture, dead or alive. Velith stared at the screen. Her face grew pale. They've put a bounty on you, she said. Jorn raised an eyebrow. Correction. On us. You could leave me, Velith said quietly. Save yourself. Not happening, he replied. They want you because they're afraid of you. That means you're special. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed in the tunnel behind them. Metal boots. They both stood up fast. Hide, Jorn whispered. Velith slipped behind a pillar. 3 alien bounty hunters entered. Their armor was black, with red marks shaped like claws. One carried a shock lance, another a net launcher, and the third held a heat scanner. I see 2 heat signatures, the lead one growled. 1 human, 1 hybrid. Jorn raised his hands. Easy, fellas. No one's dying today. The first bounty hunter stepped forward. Hand her over. She's property of Zarntech Labs. Wrong, Jorn said. She's a person. The second hunter fired the net launcher. Velith leaped from the shadows, her mouth open wide. A mist of spit sprayed the air, hitting the net mid-flight. It melted before it even touched Jorn. The bounty hunters shouted in panic. One aimed his lance, but before he could strike, Velith tackled him. Her saliva hissed as it dripped onto his chest plate, burning through it like butter. Jorn shot the third hunter with a stun pistol. The alien dropped instantly. Velith stood over the leader, who was now begging, Please, don't melt me. She leaned close. I'm not a monster. But next time, I won't show mercy. She let him go. Jorn stared at her, amazed. She hadn't lost control. She had chosen her actions. Later that night, they sat beside a small fire in an abandoned transport station. The stars twinkled through a broken ceiling. Velith was quiet. Jorn passed her a small drink pouch. You okay? She nodded. Today, I didn't feel like a weapon. I felt like me. Then you're winning, Jorn said. Velith looked at him. But something strange is happening. What do you mean? She touched her chest. My powers, they're changing. Changing how? I think, when I'm near you, they grow weaker, or gentler. I don't know why. Jorn looked confused. Maybe I'm your balance. Velith leaned her head on his shoulder. Or maybe, you're the first person who made me feel human. Jorn didn't speak, but his hand gently touched hers. And for the first time, her hand didn't burn anything at all. Hunters from the stars. The night was silent, except for the soft crackling of the small fire. Jorn and Velith sat close together, hidden inside an old transport station buried beneath the cliffs. They hadn't spoken for a while. After escaping the bounty hunters, silence felt like safety. Velith leaned her head against Jorn's shoulder, eyes half closed. Her body was slowly healing, but her heart still carried the weight of every test, every scar. Jorn gently shifted. Hey, he whispered, you should get some sleep. I'll keep watch. Velith opened her eyes. You don't have to protect me. I want to, Jorn replied. She looked at him for a moment, then finally closed her eyes again. Jorn sat still, hand resting near his blaster, staring into the darkness. His mind raced. Why was Velith's power affected by him? Why were humans immune to her acid? And who else was hunting them? He didn't have answers. But soon, someone else came looking. Far above the atmosphere, a sleek black ship exited warp space. Its wings stretched wide like claws. The ship was silent, deadly, and alive with energy. On board stood 3 alien warriors, elite hunters from the Guild of Silent Shadows. Their leader, Commander Kerox, stared at the screen showing Velith's face. She's active, he said. Confirmed sightings. Power levels unstable. Human contact established. One of his lieutenants asked, do we extract or eliminate? Kerox grinned. We take both. The hybrid and the human. Down below, Velith woke suddenly. Something was wrong. She stood up quickly, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Jorn stirred. What is it? I don't know, she whispered. But something is coming. They grabbed their gear and slipped outside. The night wind hit them fast. Jorn pulled up his collar, leading Velith across the cliffs. They moved quietly, stepping over rocks, ducking under dead trees. Suddenly, boom! A shockwave hit the ground behind them. Dust flew everywhere. The air split open with a scream of burning energy. A large shadow dropped from the sky. Kerox's hunter ship. Its doors opened. 3 tall armored aliens stepped out. One held a plasma net. Another had blades fused into his arms. The last one floated above the ground, his eyes glowing. Jorn pulled Velith behind a rock. "Stay down." She shook her head. "They're here for me. I should face them. They'll kill you. Then I won't let them." Before Jorn could stop her, Velith stood tall and walked forward. Her silver skin shimmered in the moonlight. Her eyes locked onto Kerox as he stepped forward. "You came far," she said coldly, "just to try and cage me again." "You belong in a cage," Kerox growled. "Your power is too dangerous. Your blood is poison." "Then why chase me?" she asked. "Afraid of a girl?" Kerox lifted his arm, and the plasma net flew toward her. But she didn't move. The net wrapped around her, buzzing and sparking. Jorn shouted and ran forward, but the floating hunter slammed him into a wall with a mental blast. Velith dropped to her knees, trapped. "I warned you," Kerox said, stepping close. "The human makes you soft, weak." Velith raised her eyes. "No," she whispered. "He makes me stronger." Then she screamed, not in fear, but in rage. Her saliva blasted out like steam. The net melted instantly. Her arms burned with glowing acid. She lunged forward, spitting in Kerox's face. He screamed as his armor sizzled. The other hunters rushed in, but Jorn recovered fast, shooting the floating alien straight in the back. It dropped like a stone. Velith fought the blade arm warrior, dodging fast and spitting in quick bursts. One drop of her saliva hit his weapon. It melted. She hit him in the chest next. He fell. Kerox, his helmet half-burned, growled, "You're stronger than before." Velith stood beside Jorn now. Her voice was steady. "You thought you made me a weapon. But I'm not yours. I'm not theirs. I'm mine." She ran toward Kerox and hugged him. He laughed in confusion until her saliva soaked through the broken armor. He screamed again. Velith jumped back, breathing heavily. Kerox dropped to the ground, unconscious. Jorn stood speechless. "You hugged him," he said. "I had no better plan," she said, panting. They looked around. All 3 hunters were down, but Velith was shaking. Her skin was glowing too bright. Her chest heaved. Smoke rose from her arms. "What's wrong?" Jorn asked. "I used too much power," she whispered. "I can't control it." Her saliva began to drip. The ground beneath her feet sizzled. Even her breath seemed hot now. Jorn reached out. "Velith, calm down. I can't. I feel like I'm burning inside." She stumbled back. "Don't come near me." "I'm not afraid," he said, taking another step. "You can control it. You already have. Remember the mirror, the metal, me." Tears fell from her eyes, but they didn't burn him. Jorn wrapped his arms around her. "You're not alone." Velith sobbed softly in his arms. And then, the light in her skin faded. The heat dropped. The sizzling stopped. She was calm. For now. The secret in human DNA. The morning sky turned red as twin suns rose slowly over the cliffs of Zectra 9. Jorn sat by the rocks, holding Velith's hand gently. She had fallen asleep after the fight, her body wrapped in a blanket of soft fabric Jorn had pulled from the ruined ship. He watched her chest rise and fall slowly. For the first time, she wasn't trembling. But he was still thinking. Why did she react so strongly to him? Why did her powers weaken when he touched her or held her? She was dangerous to almost everything, but not to him, not even a little. Something inside him told him it wasn't just luck. It was something deeper, something in his blood. He looked over to the bodies of the defeated bounty hunters. One of them, a floating psychic type, had a data chip glowing inside his helmet. Jorn pulled it out and slid it into his handheld tablet. The screen buzzed, then displayed a locked file labeled Project Saliva, Human Compatibility Experiment, Phase Z. Jorn's eyes narrowed. He tapped the screen. It asked for a password. Velith. He tried. It unlocked. A video played. An alien scientist appeared on the screen, gray-skinned, tall, with 4 eyes and a cold stare. The hybrid known as Velith is progressing. However, subject displays unexpected emotional control when exposed to human pheromones and touch. Her acid glands go dormant. Her mutation fades. We now believe human DNA, especially male, may act as a regulator. This means one thing. The perfect biological balance for Velith is not among her creators. It is among the species we once saw as inferior, humans. Jorn stared at the screen in shock. He looked at Velith, still sleeping, peaceful and quiet. She wasn't just made to kill, she was made to bond. With humans. With someone like him. He suddenly felt protective in a new way, not just as a savior, but as something more. Hours later, Velith slowly woke up. Her eyes fluttered open. "Are we safe?" she whispered. "For now," Jorn said. She sat up, stretching slowly. "I remember everything. The fight. The burning inside me." "You almost lost control," Jorn said gently. "But you didn't. You stopped." "Because of you," Velith said, looking at him. "I don't know how, but when you're close, it's like my power gets quiet." "I think I found the reason," Jorn said, showing her the tablet. Velith read the screen slowly. Her lips parted in shock. "They planned it," she whispered. "They knew humans could calm me. They designed you this way." Velith's hands trembled. "So I was never meant to be free. I was made for someone. For a human." Jorn reached out. "No, that doesn't mean you belong to anyone. It means you're connected to something. Someone. That's not a curse. That's a choice." Velith looked up at him, eyes shining. "Do you think? Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe. I was meant to feel this way." "I think you're more human than most people I know," Jorn said. "Because you care." Velith stood and stepped close. Her voice was soft. "Touch me." Jorn hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I want to know if it's real." He slowly reached out and placed his hand on her cheek. Her skin was cool. No heat. No hiss. No pain. Velith smiled with tears in her eyes. "I don't feel like acid. I feel normal." "You are normal," Jorn whispered. They stood like that for a long moment, two souls built from different worlds, now linked by something deeper than science. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the valley. Engines. Not bounty hunters this time. Something bigger. A human research vessel landed nearby. Jorn grabbed his gear. "That's the rescue crew. I sent a signal hours ago, before the hunters came." Velith tensed. "Will they take me away? Lock me up again?" "Not if I explain," Jorn said. "Not if you trust me." As the ship landed, armored humans stepped out. Their captain was a tall woman with short silver hair and a badge that read, "Captain Lairs." She walked straight to Jorn. "You look like hell, vassal." "You should see the other guys," he smirked. "I need your help." Lairs looked at Velith. "Is that the weapon?" "She's not a weapon," Jorn said firmly. "She's a person. She's different, yes, but she saved my life." Velith stepped forward. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." Lairs raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you here for?" Velith looked at Jorn. "I want to live. I want to learn. And I want to find out who I really am." Lairs paused for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if you burn my ship, you're flying home on foot." Velith smiled faintly. "Deal." Later, aboard the ship, Jorn watched Velith stare at the stars through the window. "You know," she said softly, I never believed I'd leave that place, or that I'd find someone like you. I didn't think I'd ever meet someone like you either, Jorn replied. But I'm glad I did. Velith turned to him. Do you think there are more like me? We'll find out together, he said. She took his hand, and her touch was still warm, but not dangerous. Not anymore. The deal of surrender. The human research vessel, Starbound Echo, drifted silently above Sector 9, orbiting the damaged world like a lonely moon. Inside, Jorn stood by the observation deck, sipping a warm drink. His eyes followed Velith as she stared out the window, watching the stars. She didn't say much these days. Her silver skin glowed faintly under the lights. She had cleaned up, changed into a simple gray uniform the crew had given her. But even now, with Safety around her, she didn't smile the way Jorn hoped she would. Are you okay? He asked gently. Velith didn't turn. I keep thinking, this is all fake, that I'll wake up back in the lab, chained, cold, alone. Jorn stepped closer. You're not there anymore. She finally turned to him. But they still want me, don't they? Jorn nodded slowly. Captain Lairs got a transmission. From your creators. Velith tensed. What did they say? They want you back. Alive. In exchange, they offered a ceasefire with Earth's outer colonies. A full trade agreement. Technology, resources, everything. Velith stepped back, her eyes wide. They're willing to stop a war, just to get me. You're that valuable to them. She lowered her head. Because I'm their weapon. Jorn shook his head. Because they know they can't make another like you. He took her hand. You're not a thing. You're not a prize. You're a person. I told Lairs we're not trading you for peace. Velith looked into his eyes. But if I stay, they'll keep hunting me. Let them, Jorn said. We'll be ready. But even as he spoke, alarms blared across the ship. Incoming Sci-Janelle. Leuven Hinon ship AP Pro Chiang. They ran to the control room. Lairs and her officers stared at the screen. A massive alien ship hovered outside their sensors. Black, silent, surrounded by a glowing blue aura. They bypassed our shields like paper, one officer whispered. On screen, a message appeared. We request to speak. 1 hour. No weapons. No lies. Velith stepped forward. Let me go. I'll talk to them. No, Jorn said instantly. They'll trick you. Lairs folded her arms. She won't go alone. An hour later, in the cargo bay, Velith stood across from her old master. Vecrun. Tall, pale-skinned, eyes like ice, dressed in royal robes lined with living threads. Velith, he said, voice smooth. You're even more beautiful now. The acid hasn't eaten your soul yet. Impressive. I'm not your tool anymore, she said firmly. Wrong. You are my creation, and I've come to offer you everything. Jorn clenched his fists, but stayed back. Vecrun continued. Return with me. I'll cancel the bounty. End the war with humans. Give them cures, ships, knowledge. You'll live in comfort, as a queen among weapons. Velith stared at him, silent. And the human? She asked. Vecrun smirked. You'll forget him. No, she whispered. Vecrun's eyes flashed. You belong to me. Velith stepped forward. I don't belong to anyone. Then she opened her mouth, and a thin spray of saliva hissed inches from his feet. The floor steamed. Vecrun stared down, then laughed. So emotional, just like humans. I am part human now, she said. And I choose me. Vecrun's smile faded. You'll regret this. She leaned close. I already did. Every second I spent in your lab. But not anymore. Vecrun turned, his voice cold. This isn't over. The stars are wide. And we will find you again. Then he vanished into light, beaming back to his ship. Within minutes, the alien vessel disappeared into space. Back in her room, Velith sat alone, thinking. Jorn knocked once, then entered. You okay? She looked at him. I said no to peace, to an easy life, to everything. You said yes to yourself, Jorn said, and that's worth more. She smiled faintly. He called me a queen among weapons, but I don't want to rule. I just want to be. Jorn sat beside her. You don't have to be anything but Velith. She looked at him. But what if being near you keeps my powers quiet because I'm meant to be with you? Jorn paused. Then stay close. Velith leaned her head on his shoulder again. And this time, when she closed her eyes, she wasn't afraid of waking up in chains. She's not a weapon. She's a woman. The stars outside the starbound Echo glowed brighter than ever. Jorn stood in the engine bay, tightening a panel on the ship's damaged side. The recent encounter with Vecron's ship had left scars, not only on the vessel but on everyone's hearts. He wiped the sweat from his brow and sighed. He hadn't seen Velith in hours. She had been quiet since the meeting, quieter than usual. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss. Velith stepped in. Her silver skin reflected the blue light of the engine core. She wasn't wearing the gray uniform anymore. She had modified it, cut off the badge, loosened the belt, and added a small cloth band around her wrist. Jorn had given it to her. She called it her anchor. You fixed it, she said softly, pointing to the panel. Mostly, Jorn replied. She's holding together, just like us. Velith smiled. I wanted to show you something. She walked to a nearby table, where she had set up a small metal box. Inside it was a cube of titanium, one of the strongest metals known. She held it in her hand, then closed her eyes. Watch, she whispered. She opened her mouth, and a single drop of her saliva fell onto the cube. Nothing happened. Jorn leaned forward. Wait, it's not melting. She looked at him. It only melts when I fear myself, when I hate myself. She held his hand. But with you, I don't feel fear. Jorn stepped closer. So you've learned to control it. Velith nodded. Because I've accepted it. I'm not a curse. I'm not a monster. You're not a weapon, he said softly. I'm a woman, she said, standing tall. And I choose what I become. Just then, the ship's alarm blared. Warning. UNREGISTERE ship APPROACHAing rapidly. Laraz's voice came through the speaker. Jorn. Velith. Get to the bridge. Now. The bridge was full of tension. Captain Laraz stood at the center, staring at the screen. A strange ship was approaching, not from Vecron's forces this time, but from a new faction. Unknown. Unnamed. They're hailing us, the officer said. Put it through, Laraz replied. A deep voice filled the room. We come not to fight, but to speak to the girl. We've seen what she is. We want to help. Velith stepped forward. Who are you? The voice answered. We are remnants of the resistance, escaped from Zarntech. We carry others like you, hybrids they created and then tried to destroy. Velith's eyes widened. There are more like me. Yes, and they need a leader. Jorn turned to her. It's your choice. Velith was silent. For the first time in her life, someone wanted her not for war, not for science, but for who she was. She took a deep breath. I want to meet them. Laraz nodded. You'll have an escort. Jorn frowned. And me. Velith turned to him. Come with me. You sure? He asked. You helped me find myself, she said. Now help me help others. Hours later, their shuttle docked with the resistance ship. Velith stepped out and froze. In front of her stood beings who looked like her, some with acid scars, others with glowing eyes, all afraid, all silent. One of them stepped forward, a young girl with trembling hands. Are you Velith? Velith knelt and touched her face gently. Yes, and unlike you. The girl cried. They called us monsters. So did they call me, Velith said. But we're not. We're survivors. Cheers rose around her. Jorn stood back, watching her. She moved through the group, touching each one, calming them, whispering to them. She didn't hide anymore. Later, on the deck, Jorn joined her under the stars. "You looked like a queen," he said. "I felt like something more," she replied. "Like a mother, a sister, a leader." She looked at him. "And maybe," she said, "a mate." Jorn's eyes widened. "You mean, in my culture, when a hybrid chooses someone, it's for life, not as a weapon, but as a heart." She leaned close, her silver lips brushing his ear. "Do you choose me too?" He smiled. "I already did." They kissed under the stars. And her saliva, still harmless, still warm, still hers,